Hello and welcome back to another episode of Wind Waker Unflooded. This is a 3D modeling fan art project where we are bringing to life the world of Hyrule within the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda, the Wind Waker, corresponding to the islands of the Great Sea, figuring out what does the world of Hyrule look like below the sea. Excuse me. It's been a while since I've done a voiceover. I feel like I'm out of tune with my intro there. I'm stuttering over it, but this is life, this is raw, this is unfiltered, and that's why we do that's why we do these videos to be transparent, and there's no script. It's just fluid stream of consciousness. Boom, welcome to another episode. Join me today. Oh man, I'm losing it. But let's talk about the work that we get done in this episode. Sometimes I'll get comments and they're like, Joe, interesting discussion, but you didn't talk about what you worked on in the actual video. So I want to talk about like what was guiding some of these creative decisions and just address some things. But first off, we are working on the east side of Hyrule. This is the mountainside near Thorn Fairy Isle, I think it's called. And this is pretty close to my, recreation of the Breath of the Wild's Kakaro Village. There's several different Kakaro villages, right? There's, of course, Kakaro Village from Ocarina of Time that in the Wind Waker Unflooded map is just under Windfall Island. There is the hidden village from Twilight Princess, which isn't represented in the Wind Waker Unflooded map yet. I don't know exactly what I want to do with that idea. I'm not sure if that's different from Ocarina of Time's Kakariko. There's also Twilight Princess's Kakariko, like the site that it takes place in, that valley. And like I don't think it would have developed the same way, but it could be interesting to like still have that valley in Wind Waker Unflooded. There's that Kakariko, and then there's Breath of the Wild's Kakariko Village, which I'm treating kind of as a separate village with the same name. And we could differentiate it. We could come up with a new name. That's something we could do as a community, or it's something where it's new Kakariko, while what was Kakariko in Ocarina of Time is now just known as the Windfall. The town of Windfall. It could have completely changed its name as it's expanded, grown onto its mountaintop. But I was talking to the community and we were discussing some ideas for the different sages, right? During the time of Wind Waker Unflooded, this is like timeline-wise, I'm creating this world right before the Great Flood takes place. This is Hyrule right before it floods. And so there would be sages that, that fulfill different roles throughout the series, but especially from what we know during the events of the Wind Waker, the sages are instrumental in protecting the power of the Master Sword, in praying to the gods, especially for the sake of the Master Sword's power. But they serve many different functions and were important in sealing Ganon away at the end of Ocarina of Time. There's so many different reasons that sages are important, but in Wind Waker we see that there's they're connected to the temples in a way that we haven't seen sages be before. This isn't just in Ocarina of Time, right? Like you complete the sage temples, you're maybe accomplishing something that saves the region in some way, and it's a meaningful thing that you accomplish with the sage, right? You and Darunia help defeat Volvagia. But in Wind Waker, you're taking sages to a place that they can pray, so that in that temple, the Sage of Earth can go to the Temple of Earth to pray. These are sites of prayer, places that they go. And so we were having a discussion in the community about like, all right, so we have the Wind Temple, we have the Earth Temple. In the time of Wind Waker Unflooded, what about the other elements, right? Now, I can say Fire Temple, and that may conjure the idea of the Fire Temple from Ocarina of Time. But the question isn't, what is the location that is the Fire Temple in Ocarina of Time? What does that look like during the time of Wind Waker Unflooded? The question is, where does the Sage of Fire pray? what is their site of prayer? That's a different question. And same here with the with who the Sheikah sage would be. So this question is, what is, let's say the Sheikah is still the sage of shadow. So what is the shadow temple? What is the new shadow temple? Where does the sage of shadow pray during the events of Wind Waker Unflooded? That's a different question than, because we've already represented a little bit of the shadow temple from Ocarina of Time as a location, right? I've modeled a little bit showing its entrance near Kakariko, which is near Windfall, but I wanted to create a shadow temple that is a new location, that is totally removed from the past sins of Hyrule. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second after the break. So without further ado, I think it's time for a short message. So I will talk to all of you later.
If you want to be able to support me as a creator, there are several ways that you can make possible the creation of everything that I do. Become a Patreon member. I post all kinds of exclusive content that you can only see first on Patreon. Stuff like behind-the-scenes content for my filmmaking projects, whether that's in-progress scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, anything for my newest films that aren't posted anywhere else besides Patreon. So become a member. There's a whole range of prices, and you can support me even in small ways. That's super meaningful. Supporting me on Patreon too gets you in the credits list of any film that I release while you're a member. And like I said, even a little goes a long way. You can also collaborate with me now through Fiverr. I offer a range of services that could help bring your project to life. And if you've heard any music in the background of this video, that was my music. So feel free to look me up on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to music. Type in Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Look up Joe Kendrick on Spotify. Supporting me is super meaningful. I don't make any ad revenue on Wind Waker Unflooded. If you see an ad on the video, it's because YouTube is putting ads on their videos. I'm not making any ad revenue from this project. It's completely not monetized for me. So if you want to be able to support me as a creator, any way that you can do that means a lot, and it goes towards the creation of all that I do. So thank you to everyone who's supported me along the way.
And we're back. So yeah, let's just kind of unpack more about the lore of this location I'm working on. This is near the Breath of the Wild Kakaro Village, and so I thought it made sense. Well, let's put this new shadow temple, quote unquote, right, kind of in the proximity of the town. It is on the way to the mountainside up, the mountainside of the fairy island here, the Thorn Fairy Island. And so the idea here, talking to the community, there was an idea that this was a place where the sage would be similar to how, Impa was kind of keeping Bongo contained. That's one of the things that the Sage of Shadow was trying to do. Impa was in Ocarina of Time, of course. Like, her primary function was Zelda's attendant, I think. That's my understanding. But I guess, like, with that in mind, with this idea of, like, keeping monsters at bay, that this Shadow Temple could be a place where maybe there are spirits leaking from it. There's a different relationship, of course, that this Shadow Temple has to the undead than, of course, the Shadow Temple Ocarina of Time has to the undead. It is a torture chamber. It is a place of undead. And as is the Earth Temple. It's not a torture chamber, but it is a place, a resting place, but also a house for the living dead. And I just thought it would be interesting to say, well, let's have a Shadow Temple that is not even necessarily related to death, unless there are spirits there. And this, like, the shadow element, kind of what I want to do with it during the timeline of Wind Waker Unflooded. And like these story points are all worth thinking about because it impacts the map, right? It impacts the modeling. It's impacting, today's progress. But I guess, like, my differentiation, right, in talking about the different elements, like, there's a, they can have, how do I put this? I'm tripping over my words because I'm trying to figure out how to say this. They can both, like, both shadow and earth, those elements can, like, be about death in different ways. In Wind Waker, right, we have the Earth Temple. My take, I guess, like, to be clear, is that, like, in Wind Waker we have the Wind and Earth Temple, and that is kind of about life and death, using different words, right? The Wind Temple is a place of growth. The Earth Temple is a place of undead, and burial. So there is this like decay versus growth themes that are, kind of that yin and yang for both of those dungeons, which I think is very different from a shadow temple, from the shadow element, which could be more about dark magic, which is very different, right? So I guess like I want to draw that line there and kind of just say lore wise, that's my interpretation of the elements there, right? And I know that like superficially, right, you could talk about like comparing the Earth Temple to the Ocarina of Time Shadow Temple, because these are both kind of dark places that are crypts, right? But that is, I think, a superficial similarity, especially in comparing the thematic ideas around the elements. But I don't know. That's all I want to say there. Just to talk about just some of the other modeling progress that we're doing. I want to draw attention to just the mountain. As I've been working on that, I had like a little bit of work done on like the hilltop around the Thorned Fairy Island, but I wanted to just kind of completely redo it, reapproach it, and I got a lot of progress on it. And this is one of those videos where I got a lot done, and yet there's still so many holes there, and it still looks very unfinished just because nothing's connected. But I got a lot done in this episode, and it's maybe like twice as much as I might have gotten done in another video. Like, it's a lot for an episode, but as we zoom out, it's just because the progress is so disconnected, it doesn't feel like a lot. But I'm proud of this, and there was a lot of just figuring out this general terrain for this area around this new Shadow Temple, because I wanted to create this kind of isolated area where, if this Sage of Shadow, goes there to keep spirits at bay, there's a reason that the spirits that may be leaking from this area, aren't spreading to the rest of the world. There's this kind of geographic isolation, and I wanted to kind of communicate that. So you have to go down these cliffs to get to the area, and it's full of steep terrain. And I'm still working on that, but I want it to be a kind of dramatic shape there, and we're still working on it. There's still progress, but I'm excited by it, and I think we got a lot done today. And there was some cool stuff with the cave system too, right? You might have seen it in the time lapse. Just seeing like creating like a path up to the top of the mountain. I thought it'd be cool just to like, I haven't done many caves, but I think it makes sense. And while I want to avoid interiors for the most part, I do think there are times where it makes sense, especially for creating these pathways. And I want to have like, all right, like the path, you can kind of like follow it with your eye, and you can see that, it kind of goes inside the mountain for a bit, and then it comes out of the mountain. And I just think that that's also an interesting addition to the model. And so that's the idea, right? Is that like you can climb the mountain on the outside, and then you go inside the cave, and you also climb a good bit of the mountain inside the cave. And I think that that would be cool in kind of a similar way that Dragon Rouge Cavern exists, right? The way that is set up. Just have that interior ascension. So anyway, I think that's a good breakdown of everything that we're working on in this video. Y'all, thank you all so much for watching. I always appreciate you watching. Leave a comment if you have any ideas and what you want to see me work on next. But without further ado, I'll let you go.